Hey there, I'm Ken. This is Canadian Retro Things. Welcome. Today it is time for the conclusion to the Robert Kilgus interview. That's right, this is part 4. This is the conclusion of the interview with Robert Kilgus. We have covered so far his early years, his Model 1 years, and the start of his CoCo years. So today we are going to finish up the CoCo years and see what he did beyond that. All right, well, without further ado, let's jump right into that interview. Hey there, this is Ken. This is Canadian Retro Things, and today I'm in Flint, Michigan, doing an interview. I'm sitting down today with L Curtis Boyle and Bob Kilgus. You may recognize the name from some great CoCo games of the past, such as Dino Wars and Skiing, but because this is going to be a in-depth interview and I want to make sure everything goes perfectly, I'm not going to be sitting here. Curtis is going to be doing the interview, and I am going to be behind the camera.
So basically, you got this burst of programs out, the 4 that were basically contracted, which I'm guessing are Music, Dino Wars, Skiing, and Quasar Commander, because Van Chandler initially approached you about 4. And now I did want to ask one quick question for getting on to your next program, your 5th one. Were you approached with Van Chandler for doing anything besides cartridge games that first while? Because of the TRS-80 Model 1, of course, there was cassette, then disc. The CoCo had cassette right off the bat available, but it seemed to be just for people to save their own stuff, and they didn't get anybody writing any cassette programs at the beginning. I was wondering, did he ever approach you, or did you ask him about making cassette-based?
I really don't remember. This was
44 years ago.
Yeah. I have to keep reminding. A lot of the stuff that happened in that, as we were coming up towards the end of my career with Radio Shack, the memories start fading out faster for some reason. But frankly, word processors and data management programs are not the most exciting thing in the world to be able to write.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just functions. There's no applying physics. There's no applying.
So you found the game development more exciting to do personally?
Well, sure. It was more challenging because you had to apply physics and geometry and in some respects understanding of optics. So I forget a lot about the games. I do know that I did stuff having to do with the disc on the color computer.
Yeah, which we'll be getting into just shortly here.
But I don't remember doing much of anything with regard to tape.
Yeah, the one program that's coming up here, and a couple others here that do have some tape functions is the reason I was asking. Because I was kind of surprised when Tandy brought out the CoCo, and the first year or so, there was no tape-based programs for sale at all. And the Model 1 started on tape. And the Model 3 had tape stuff getting released off the start, but the CoCo did not. It was all cartridge, and then they waited for disc eventually.
They never bothered asking me.
Okay. So the next batch of programs you came out are more serious ones. There was Art Gallery, which is kind of, it even had its own overlay on the keyboard to remember all the commands, because there's a lot of them, for drawing pictures and stuff. And actually there was an Art Gallery tape that came with 27 sample pictures where you could see like the different color modes and different resolutions and stuff. Was this something contracted by Tandy, or was this something you came up yourself?
The samples?
Well, the Art Gallery itself, first of all.
Art Gallery?
This sounds more like a Tandy might have requested you thing.
It's very possible they did. Again, holes in the memory.
Yeah.
I do remember discussions with Van that when it came to printers, I didn't understand, or I wasn't involved with using printer drivers.
Okay.
A lot of programs, they do their printing by way of a driver. I didn't have a driver. Printing was just a part of the program to me. And so if I am encountering a different kind of printer,
There's no way for you to change it. Like this escape code sequence is bold here, but it means italics over here.
Yeah, I didn't have the capability of incorporating a different driver for a different program. I had to program for that different device. And I do remember that he was sort of disappointed that, yeah, I could write it so that it would handle that printer, like the little plotter printer.
Yeah.
Well, all you got to do is write a new print driver for it. No, I don't. I need to incorporate it into my program.
Yeah.
Because
or you have to change the structure of the program to be able to offload a driver or something.
Right.
Here's where your virtual system would work good. So Art Gallery came out first, and that was an art editing program, basically, which did allow saving to tape. So that's when Tandy started selling some stuff that was tape. The next two were Color Scripsit and Spectaculator. Now, I'm trying to remember, were you involved with Scripsit for the Model 1, which had already been out for several years? Oh. Like, I don't see you as an author, but I don't see who the author was. So.
I gave you a list of programs.
Okay, it wasn't on that list.
If it wasn't on that list, I don't think I did it.
Okay. So do you remember if like Scripsit being an existing program with the Model 1 by somebody else, did you get any approach from Van, like, we need this ported to the CoCo, or
no.
Or did you just say, we need a word processor, we're going to call it the same thing just so people know it's a word processor?
I either voluntarily offered or was requested to provide a word processor, name unspecified,
okay.
and they would have put the name Scripsit on it.
Okay. Because the two you brought out, and this would have been around the end of 1981, the 1982 Radio Shack catalog shows them as available November 30th, 1981, so the catalog came out around August. And Scripsit, of course, word processor. Unfortunately, we still had the checkerboard new inverse video for lowercase. That was the limit of the VDG. And then Spectaculator was actually a spreadsheet program, and actually a fairly powerful one from when I've been kind of going through it, so I was kind of surprised at how extensive it was. And Scripsit, as I mentioned, was out on the TRS-80 Model 1 for several years, but Spectaculator later got ported to the Model 100 and a few other machines later, but yours was the first. Tandy had not put out a spreadsheet before. So, a CoCo was our first spreadsheet program from any Tandy computer. Was kind of surprising in and of itself.
I remember one particular difficult problem in a spreadsheet program, and that was the problem of recursion, where you get a variable that affects this, but this affects that, and this affects this.
And you get a circular loop of...
Where you get the value of an item is partially determined by the item's value itself, but indirectly through other, who knows how many different links you have to go through to get to it. And I remember having to figure out, how the hell do you prevent that from happening and getting it into an infinite loop? And I finally just decided to set a counter and limit it to 10
recursion levels deep, and then I'm done.
10 levels deep, and it doesn't go beyond that.
Yeah. The next game you did, and this is a bit of a throwback, is Color Cubes. And I say it's a throwback because it's, of course, based on Rubik's Cube, which was hugely popular in the late 70s. This was released, or supposed to be released originally on March 30th, 1982, and probably did come out roughly around there. Now, yours actually allowed stuff like tape saves. You could undo up to 255 moves. You had another overlay here, so you could remember what keys did, all the rotations and stuff. Now, this one here, I like the fact that you're quite intellectual in quite a lot of things, and Rubik's Cube was considered an intellectual game, toy, whatever you want to call it at the time. I was wondering, was this one that you wanted to do, to have a computer version of it, or is this something that Tandy would have requested because it was such a craze around the world?
There's a very good chance that that was one that was requested, because it was a very unsatisfying thing.
Oh, why would you say that?
To me, because I could not get any kind of smooth action in the movements. The best I could handle with the amount of memory available for templates of things was, okay, you've got a disk here, halfway, all the way, halfway, all the way. I couldn't go 1/4.
Just not enough RAM.
I couldn't get because for each position I needed a template, and there just wasn't enough room. So the best I could do was one step in between, just enough so that you could keep track of which colors are moving in which direction, so that you know which way it's actually turning, but that was about it. And Beyond that, well, I'm reasonably good at figuring out ways of storing and compressing data and being able to keep a record of moves and a way of notating the moves
So you can undo them, yeah.
so that you can undo them. That was no big problem at all.
Okay. Next up after that was your first 2 disc programs. Now I think, like the CoCo itself, I think you were on the early train at Tandy for getting a disc system before it was officially released.
I wouldn't know.
Okay. Because your version of the Scripsit and Spectaculator actually added a few pretty cool things. Those disc Scripsit, these came out between March and August of '82. And there's a bit of a gap in the catalogs when they're published, so I can't narrow it any further than that. Scripsit, you actually ran it on a graphic screen to get past the I only have uppercase and inverse video lowercase. You actually did a character set in the highest resolution mode to get true lowercase. And was that something you just decided once you have a disk drive and you have that much more room, is that something you wanted to put in because you didn't like the checkerboard? Is it something they requested, or do you remember?
I don't remember why. I just remember doing it.
Okay.
It was what needed to be done.
Yeah, I have to agree.
And by whatever means I could find to do it. And I didn't have any particular problem dealing with graphics.
Even more graphics.
Any resolution. I mean, it's.
Yeah, because it looks a lot better. In fact, they started using it a lot of their pictured ads. They didn't show the cartridge version much hidden after that because it looks so much better with true lowercase. Spectaculator, if you remember any of this, I'll be surprised, to be honest. Basically, the new features there from the cartridge version were partial save to disk. Well, obviously, if you need a disk drive to do that anyway. There was a SAP spreadsheet to clear things out and start a new spreadsheet, which is just a shortcut, basically. It didn't seem to be too much change, except that you had more room on the disk to save your spreadsheets on. But this is where it gets a bit interesting on your history of working with virtual memory and stuff here, is that this is where you first did your TRS color DOS, which you originally had spec'd out and sent to Van Chandler to, and this was something you actually asked him to do, was to say, I don't need any royalties in this. If you give me a flat fee, you can hand this out to all the other developers, and they can use it. Because as you found out, as we've also found out, Microsoft Basic, Disk Extended Basic, absolutely sucks for assembly language programs if you want to use the legal calls. It's basically just sector read write. If you want to figure out the file system and directory structure, you have to do it all on your own. So you got kind of tired of that too, and you actually went and created a TRS-DOS that is file-oriented. It also has stuff like built-in help. You use REM statements to fill in stuff. But you also started working on your virtual memory and like you did all the complicated stuff you did on microfiles. You started moving it to the CoCo.
Well, it wasn't quite as sophisticated as microfiles.
No, not quite, but yeah.
Because it didn't allocate memory like microfiles. Microfiles allocated memory in 32-byte chunks. Every 256-byte block of data was managed by dividing it into 8 pieces, because 1 byte has 8 bits in it. So that tells me whether all of the 8 pieces of that block are available or not. So I could map available memory that way. That's why it ended up being 32 bytes per allocatable block. But on the color computer, it was rather using the concepts that I learned in commercial programming of structured programming, where you have a subroutine or a block of code, and most of what it does is done by subroutines. So you get a mother here, and you go to a daughter here, a daughter there to do the various functions that this mother needs to be done. And sometimes the daughter does the same thing and has grandchildren beyond there. So it's a case of stacking. You get your main line, and there's the space above it is open. Okay, you start needing to call something else, you stack it on top of it. You need another one, you stack it on top of that. I mean, this one, if it calls something else, it stacks on top of that. And the main thing that my operating system per se did was managed to keep track of which ones are in memory, and as the caller lets go, then they start disappearing and the memory becomes available
open, yeah.
for the next block to call its subroutines. And that means that one thing about being able to relocate things like that is that it takes a slight change in programming technique.
Yeah.
You avoid using a direct address in anything. Always use a relative address. And when it comes to a relative address, I again found it useful to have a block at the beginning that says where the pieces are, where all your pieces are. A program,
whether they're mapped in or
a
whether
program locator table. When your program is put on in a file, at the beginning of that file, there will be a table of pointers that point to each independently coded segment that is self-contained, that does nothing but reference within itself. If it needs to reference something outside itself, it does it by way of an indirect call through a pointer in the master control program, telling that routine which segment you're trying to get to, and that subroutine will find a place for it, get it in memory, and then pass control to it. And then when it's done, that same routine in the operating system will get control back to the caller.
Yeah. And I mean, you'd created a great amount of documentation for this. You'd submitted to Chandler and agreed, I don't need royalties, one flat fee, you can give it to other programmers that are working for Tandy or developing for Tandy.
I did it, by the way, because it was something I needed.
Yeah.
I need to have the capability of writing a program that will fit in this small amount of memory I've got to work with.
Yeah.
So the only way to do it is to break your program into like a structured programming, breaking things down into a mother and a...
a bunch of routines,
Yeah.
basically, yeah. Because the two big innovations for me for that, after talking to you about, because I didn't really understand what it fully did either, because we never got the documentation you sent Van Chandler. I never saw it on anything Tandy sold. But basically, it was the fact that it handled the file system, not just the disk, the file system. So all the extra crap we had to deal with dealing with granule tables and allocation table stuff, we didn't have to do. You fixed all that. And then also, of course, some of the virtual memory techniques you did. Okay, so you did all this work doing color TRS-DOS, and you actually developed it. You can kind of follow your progress, even getting commercial discs from Tandy. Like if you get color Scripsit and color Spectaculator, that wasn't really version 1.2 of it. And then you get some of the later programs, you see 1.4, 1.6, 1.7. So you kept developing it for several years. And you gave it back to Tandy. You said no royalties required, just give it to people. You updated the docs for them every time you did updates. And absolutely nobody of the other developers either took it up or maybe they never got it sent. We're going to try to find out from some of the Tandy people what exactly the heck happened there. But with one big exception, and that is Microsoft themselves. When they came to do the disk version of Edtasm Plus, the editor assembler, which they'd done in cartridge before, they did use your DOS. And that was actually my first experience with it because I didn't do spreadsheets and stuff like that, but I was learning how to do assembly. And I bought the disk Edtasm and your TRS-DOS. I can't remember which version it was off the top of my head, but it's there. So I guess I know it was a big disappointment for you that it didn't get passed around and other people got to use it. But does it at least make you feel a little bit better that Microsoft themselves used it?
Well, yeah. If it was if it was being supported by EDTS ASM, then it's possible people who got that wrote for it using what was being made available from Microsoft, and possibly Microsoft gave documentation or information on how to use it, or
they didn't with the disk Edtasm documentation itself. I can say that, at least not fully. It's possible for some of the developers that bought it that they might have. But one thing we would like to do, because I think this is a lost opportunity for a lot of editor assembly programmers back in the day, is I would like to make it available, because you supply the source code of your DOS up to 1.7 to Brian Weasler, and you've got printouts of it. And there's some documentation in the printouts there of how it works and how to use all these features you just talked about. And I would like to get this presented to the general public that still does RS-DOS program, like Nick Morentis and Paul Shoemaker and Paul Fiscarelli and a bunch of others that are actually working on games and other programs now, Paul Thayer's, a few others. I'd like them to give it a shot and see what they can do with this kind of stuff, like the memory overlaying stuff that you had, some of the virtual stuff. I would love to see what would happen, and I might take a delve into it myself. And I honestly don't use Disk Basic that much anymore. I'm an Stein guy. But this is one where I think I might take a look, because what you've told me about it, and looking through the source code listing that Brian showed me on screen, it sounds really fascinating. I really got to check this out.
well, it's just so logical that you break a program up in pieces, and you can start squeezing pieces in where you don't have a whole lot of space to work with.
Yeah.
And there are very few changes in programming technique required in order to be able to use it. It's mainly that you keep things hooked to a fixed
And your lookup table system.
base point. And the edit assemble, when it's writing the disk file with your object code in, it has a series of org zeros. Each one of those org zeros, that particular segment of code can jump around random, or not random, but relative within itself. And if it needs to go anywhere other than just in that segment, it goes to it by way of a call of either a subroutine or a address that's in a table that's fixed in space in the memory.
Yeah, because I just see that as a lost opportunity. I do want to get people to give that a shot. Like I said, you do have some documentation you give Brian that we're going to do it, and I will report back to you once you have some people look at it.
I wrote it because I needed it.
Yeah, but then you offered it. That was the thing. Like, that wasn't Tandy asking you for. You offered it to Van Challenge. So this will help a lot of other programmers, and you were right. But they never sold that part of it, as far as I know. Like, if they'd given it out at Tandy Radio Shack stores, I would have grabbed it. Anyway, we'll cover some of the other utilities and stuff that you did, because I think games-wise, you were pretty well done by this point. And actually, one question is, was that because you were just more interested in doing more serious stuff, or was that Tandy requesting more serious stuff for some games?
At that point, I think it was largely a lot of software companies were born and started spreading like wildfires all over the place, and wildflowers, and there was a glut of games coming from everywhere.
Okay.
And so there wasn't really that much need that I needed to fill this vacancy. But there was a vacancy in data management, text editing, calculations, printing, various functions.
Yeah, especially on the color computer if you bought the Radio Shack, because it was viewed somewhat as the game machine.
Right.
And you were bringing the serious stuff down. So.
Right. So it just seemed like the natural thing for me to do is to do the stuff that I can do that isn't there already.
Okay, so that was your conscious decision for that. So the next one I'll just kind of do this as a two-parter, because this came up both in a cartridge version and a disc version. It was called the Graphic Pack. And it was basically for doing graphical charts based on data. You could import data from other programs, including some of your own stuff, I think, if I remember correctly. And then you would be able to draw graphs. You could do circle graphs and bar graphs and pie graphs, and it was kind of statistical analysis type thing. Do you remember if that was one that you did because you wanted to do, or is that another Tandy request? Or because your cartridge and disc versions actually were pretty close together when they came out. Like, they were only a few months apart, rather than a year or two, like, say, Scripsit.
That whole period of time
That's the blur part?
is getting pretty blurry, because frankly, there's not as much excitement to remember like a Quasar Commander in writing a program that prints out a graph.
True. I would totally agree.
So the development of them, the use of them, the challenges were no match for a lot of the stuff done in the games. But they paid well.
Yeah, that was my next question. Like, you could still make a living off doing this kind of stuff? Otherwise, why would you bother, right?
Yeah.
So color disc profile is another one you did, and this is when the DOS that was included, the TRS color DOS, was up to 1.7. So the last version you did came out around October of '83. Now, this was sold both as a regular one, and then a year or two later became part of the Tandy Home Education Systems branding, which they did for a few programs.
Yep.
And they had completely different packaging. They had a common logo on it. And I was wondering, did you know anything about this? Or?
I never even heard the term until you mentioned it to me a few days ago.
Yeah, because I was kind of surprised by myself, because I hadn't seen them. I didn't really research this type of program that often, but I was surprised to see they actually did it twice. But it seems that that particular program, Disk Profile, was at least somewhat based. It's a database program with a lot of fairly advanced features. So I'm wondering if that was maybe, if you remember, if that was maybe also a kind of a spin-off of Microfiles, like a simplified version, but Nope.
No idea.
And then the last one. This is the one that got advertised in the Radio Shack catalog, and it was listed as OS9 Scripsit. And you programmed it, and from the notes that Brian has found, you sent it to Van Chandler, and he suggested some changes. It came back, and you did those changes, sent it back to him, and then nothing happened. It never got sold, it never got released on shelves, and just disappeared off the face of the earth. And did you, first of all, did you ever hear back from Van Chandler or anybody else at Tandy as to why they didn't?
I don't recall ever being given an explanation for why it wasn't. It just didn't want it. I don't know. Maybe I didn't conform to OS 9 as much as what they needed. Didn't have the kind of modularity that they wanted for it. I don't know.
Like my personal speculation is that within a year of when that was announced, TS Edit and some other OS 9 text editors came out. And I'm wondering if maybe they just got a submission of like 3 or 4 at once, and they just had to pick 1 or 2 to go with and just not support the rest.
There's only so long you can be first in something.
Yeah, that's exactly true. But I want to mention for the viewers that have not seen it, and we're going to try to get it up and running again. In fact, I might make it a personal project to make it CoCo 3 compatible and add like 80 columns and on-screen graphics for proportional font stuff. So you supported proportional fonts right in there. You also supported, I should say, full justification, not just by word, which is what most other CoCo programs would do. You actually did it by character.
Yeah, I remember. I'm pretty sure I was getting feedback that said they wanted it not just adding a space character between, to balance it out, but if you can put individual dot columns.
Yeah.
Between.
Like a letter I is narrower, so you don't need as much extra space around it as, say, a W.
Yeah.
And you were actually taking that consideration.
Well, I think I was actually saying, okay, I've got yay many dot columns left over at the end when I don't have room for another word. Take those dot columns and distribute them among all of the characters, no matter whether it's a wide character or a narrow character, don't matter. Just add the dot column as a space evenly spread out among the characters.
Yeah, so unlike a word-based one where you have these huge gaps, especially if you get some big words in the line or something like that, you get 4 spaces.
Put an extra space between each word, and if you still need more, go back and put a second space in between a few of them.
Yeah. Now, from looking at some of the documentation that is included with the source code printout of this, the documentation you made for Van Chandler that Brian has found, I haven't read the whole thing yet, but he read some bits back to me. And there's some stuff in here that I really, really like, and I don't know anything else on the CoCo that was doing this at the time in 1984 when this would have been released. You had it supporting producing a table of contents and a sorted index automatically. So if you inserted a page or a couple paragraphs here, it would update all of the index stuff automatically. You actually would update the page numbers and everything else. You were actually auto-indexing in 1984. You also had the ability to include style files and stuff, and separate text files could also be merged in. So you could do kind of like an assembler, like a use whatever, and insert this chunk of code. You could insert a text file. So if you had some standard boilerplate, it was going to be part of all of your documentation for writing papers or whatever. You didn't have to retype it or paste it in. You just told it, link that, put it over here. And that still worked with all the indexing and stuff that you did too. We talked about proportional font support. We talked about the true justification. So it looked like in some ways it was probably the most advanced one, and maybe not advanced in all ways. I haven't looked at the full thing yet, so once I do, I'll give you a proper review. How much of a disappointment was it for you, first of all, that it never got picked up and you never got told what had happened? And did that kind of burn you out on working on the CoCo that you remember?
No, it just happened to be at very close to the same time that the whole thing about doing software for Radio Shack was coming to an end. Being outdone by the bigger software companies. I was one guy working alone doing the design, the coding, the documentation, the testing, the whole schmear. It was just one guy and his wife giving him a little help once in a while to list things out on paper. But just couldn't compete in terms of it was one man's work. It wasn't a formulated.
Yeah.
It didn't fit the template that software was starting to have to conform to. And Van was about to leave Radio Shack, and I think it was basically the two of us at pretty much the same time left Radio Shack, and I don't know what. I do remember Van talking to me a couple of times very close to that when he was giving me some tips on, well, maybe you could do this, maybe you could do that, maybe you could contact this, look there.
So he was starting to look out for you.
He was trying to look out for me, no longer working for Radio Shack like that. I mean, he did care enough to try to give me some tips on what I might be able to do and how I might go on from here. And unfortunately, the particular route that I managed to find and
which we'll talk about shortly.
Went after.
I know it's a bit of a sore point.
Yeah. But I don't blame Van for that.
No, no. The last CoCo related question I have is that one thing that really surprised us when Brian brought the stuff back from you several months ago or whatever it was there was a deluxe color computer in there. Now that's something we've heard about before because the original CoCo 2 Tandy manuals had some little side references. If you have a deluxe color computer, check its manual because the edit command doesn't work anymore. You do this instead. And a few other places, there's a few other hidden gems in there. And this is a project that got canceled literally a week before production was about to start. And from what Mark Sickles said, it was due to Motorola not being able to produce enough of the VDG chips because there was two versions now. The T1, which had true lowercase and some other features, which the Deluxe was going to have, and the regular one for the MC10 and the CoCo 2s. And basically, because the Deluxe had a lot of extra hardware, it was going to cost more to manufacture, cost more to sell. Upper management at Tandy wasn't so sure this was a good idea to put all the eggs in one basket and do it, and they canceled it. Now, do you remember anything that you remember if you even tried this, or it just got sent by Van Chandler as one of his parting gifts, and then you were kind of like, I'm done anyway, so I don't care? Or?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I don't remember. Hardware was coming and going. Whatever I needed, it was here. As long as I was able to use it to maintain the software, it stayed. There were only a couple of things in the whole few years that I ever returned, and that was probably a bare circuit board.
Like the original prototype.
Original prototypes. And the the first Model 3 that I received, I lived in this little subdivision, and here comes this big semi-trailer truck down my street in the middle of a subdivision, stops out in front of my house, and the guy gets out with his forklift or his hand truck, and he's got this huge box with a Model 3 in it. And I take it in the house, and I open it up, and the monitor had broken loose and crashed. Gosh. All that expense and time and trouble, and it was unusable because the CRT had broken its moorings and crashed into the bottom, and they had to send me a replacement. But delivered by a big semi-truck, for crying out loud, not a usual residential delivery van.
Yeah, I guess they didn't have Amazon back then.
No, I mean, it was a tractor trailer.
Yeah.
I mean, not
like a full-fledged semi.
Yeah, this is what you see out on the main highways, not something you see in a neighborhood. Oh, God. What's that guy doing over there?
Yeah, I think you were basically out of the CoCo by the time it showed up, so I'm if I can get a hold of Van Chandler for an interview, like I said, I'll ask him if he remembers, because maybe he sent it to you thinking, like when he was talking about your possible future trying to look out for you, maybe that was one of his suggestions, who knows. Now, the next question, and then we've got a bit more of a fun one, I hope, but this last one here is going to be a bit of a rough one for you. I apologize, but we kind of talked about it. And it's basically like, what happened that you got out of the microcomputer programming market altogether? It was due to a bad experience with a certain company, with a certain project, and if you want to explain what happened there.
Well, I don't know that it would be reasonable to mention the name of the company.
Yeah, I don't think they're around anymore, so it probably doesn't matter. But it's up to you. It doesn't matter.
I did find a company that wanted a program. They had an idea of what they wanted. They wanted a projection of the Earth and when you pointed your cursor at the Earth, it would tell you where you are, what the name of the country is, what their religion is, what language is spoken there, what their unit of money is called, their population, the
capital city, I think you mentioned.
Yeah, the capital of the city, all that kind of stuff. And it was an interesting project, and it was called GEO, and I wrote utility programs that they had a team of people who were inputting all the data, you know, transcribing all of the languages, the populations, the geographic coordinates of where these places were. And I had written programs that would take all that data and compress it. I'm pretty good at compressing data, and create a data file that this program would access. And then I did the trigonometric calculations to figure out a reasonable distance from the Earth to be able to get the projection. And I finally decided on a viewpoint from like 43,000 miles up, which is where geosynchronous satellites are located.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
And this was cross-platform too. Like this wasn't just for one machine.
Right. I wrote it originally for the IBM PC, I believe. And then once it was working on that, they wanted a version for the Tandy 2000. They wanted a version for the Apple computer.
Yeah. PC Junior.
Yeah, and each one was a separate program. The logic was the same, the mathematics were the same, but the execution was...
Yeah, because I mean, there's different CPUs in some of these, never mind.
Different CPUs.
Different operating systems, everything.
Different display mapping and such, the color mapping. And on some of them I used, what do they call it, with the checkerboarding of colors to create additional colors.
Dithering, yeah.
Dithering, because they only had 4 colors.
Geez, that should have been familiar.
Yeah, and when you're doing a map, you can't have all countries with different border colors with only 4. You need 5.
Yeah, because some countries have more than 4 borders with other countries. So,
well, when you get coming together, wherever there's contact, you can't map the world with 4 colors. You have to have at least 5 in order to not run into the problem of some border somewhere being the same color as the one next to it. Yeah. In which case you don't have a border. So.
And you put in a long time. This is probably the longest project you ever did.
I worked for the better part of 2 years on that program, and there was always one more modification to the utility programs for inputting the data. There was one more change to the display graphics for this particular version or that particular version. They ended up with working copies of it that had security code written into it by another programmer, so that you could send it out and you'd get to run the program 5 times, and then it would lock up and you would have to enter a password that you paid for in order to be able to use it beyond that. And so I don't know if they sold any or not. I didn't make a dime off of that.
Yeah, 2 years of work and you never got paid anything.
No. And by the time my wife was telling me, Peggy was saying to just stop. And well, this is only going to take me another few days to finish this last patch. Oh, well, okay, it's just what they want now is it's only going to be a few more days, and then it kept going on like that and adding on, and there was no end in sight until finally I think they stopped. They stopped existing.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I tried looking up some of the information on this one, and I only found a few very obscure references to it. But around that same time period, at the end of it, around the 8045 range, I did find some other Atlas-style programs released by other companies, and I wondered if the competition just killed them because they were wasting so much time getting you to do twiddles in here for 2 years straight.
Yeah, they could have taken my code and given it to somebody else or sold it to somebody else who did it. I also wrote a program that is nowhere in any of the records about what I called voice display, which I think it was, well, it did use the Radio Shack voice synthesizer because the input was phonemes.
Okay.
And I had a program that would read whatever was being displayed on the monitor and speak it. And it would either, well, it was very effective, and I got a contact eventually from a charitable institution out east somewhere serving deaf people, or blind people rather.
Okay.
And they were ecstatic because I gave it to them with no strings attached.
Yeah, just like you did with the Color Tier
stuff. Yeah, it was a very relatively small program, very heavily controlled by way of a data table, a table of connections, relationships between letters. How do you, yeah, what sound goes with this letter? And if it's preceded by this, it's this. If it's preceded by that, it's something else. If it's followed by this, if it's paired with this, it's that. A whole series of tables that recursive, you know, you'd go through the list of tables and it would find pairs of things that matched in the table and replace them with this single replacement.
So you kind of knew your data compression again too.
Yeah, it was data compression until it ran out. You go a pass and there's nothing else that would condense, then you speak what you ended up compressing it to. And it worked out rather effectively, and except for things like the GH sound, which could be an F enough,
yeah,
or
G for ghost. Or
yeah,
English is a horrible language to learn.
There were a lot of exceptions, but
yeah.
Nonetheless, it was accurate enough that a deaf person could follow what was going on the screen and be able to hear and understand an article that they were trying to read,
yeah.
but couldn't see it. So
that's actually a good finish, that particular one, because it actually was used by people who really needed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad at least you had something a little bit more beneficial coming out of that telling, because this other project sounds like a frigging nightmare.
Well, that spoiled me, because after 2 years, it was too late for me to go out and try to find a new career.
Yeah, and at that point, the computer industry was changing, because now we're starting to get this, you know, the Macs coming out with a whole new GUI interface, and Windows and stuff is starting to get talked about.
A whole new language, a whole new structure, a whole new machine capabilities, and I was two years out of date.
Yeah, you'd have to relearn everything.
And I was depressed after being taken advantage of like that for so long that I just gave up on doing anything with it, and went through a couple of years really of really being in a down state.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you pulled out of it.
Yep.
You know, I'm sure we have Peggy to thank for that as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So on a bit of a lighter note, so you did at least 16 programs that I know of, and you just mentioned a few others. There's some obviously a little bit more, and 67 years, and you were right at the dawn of the home personal computer revolution, not the kit form, and right through to 84, which is kind of when the video game crash hit, and some other things too. So you kind of did the whole first wave. You were right up there with everybody. I was wondering, is there anything that is the best, most positive memory, or even the worst memory, if you want to talk about that you experienced during that time, or if you would prefer, since you've been in the computer industry since the mainframe era in the 60s, and you're still around now when AI and all kinds of stuff is happening, do you have what is you view as the biggest jump, the biggest positive thing that's happened in the entire industry in 60 years? Or, you know, where is it going wrong? What is your views on the technology of today compared to yesterday? And
well, the progression in aerospace, I'm thinking specifically SpaceX, someone who took the leap of faith that he could do something better than what's been done all along. Why waste a rocket by throwing it away after each flight? There's got to be a better way. Well, I could find a better way to do some programs too. He's finding better ways to send stuff out into space.
yeah.
That's encouraging, and a lot of the way it gets done is by utilizing a lot of the power of computers to simulate and go through the possibilities and help people sort out what works and what doesn't work. And that is a fantastic tool that, in the right hands, can make remarkable advances. And I'm excited to see the advances that are made in certain areas.
Yeah, like medical would be one. Like the fact that computers can simulate, you know, with the way drugs work, so you don't have to test them on animals or people and then have all the side effects and do this for 5 years till you figure it out. Now you can kind of fast track it and not hurt, you know, living creatures to get to that point.
Yeah, I watch a lot of videos, latest science developments in aerospace, astronomy, the functioning of black holes and whether white holes exist.
Yeah.
I mean, all kinds of theoretical and practical examination of the world around us and the universe. And
so there's some positive. I guess the knowledge expansion is the positive thing, but we got to learn to use it properly, and we're not really doing that. We're just getting lazy with phones and stuff like you mentioned before. So yeah, I have to agree with most of what you said there myself, personally. Like I said, the internet for me was the one that was the big boon, because I started using it even before the internet became popular. I was using Gopher and a few other things back in the 80s even. But the fact that you could, you know, read some paper that somebody wrote in Europe right now, like, that was awesome. You don't have to wait for it to get printed, shipped, you know, that type of thing. But then, you know, now it's like Facebook and social engineering and a bunch of other crap that I'm not too fond of. So I'd like any technology. Technology itself is not inherently good or evil. It's how you use it that determines that. And sometimes we make the wrong decisions. But I hope, at least with the CoCo, aside from the, you know, the scripts at the end there, I hope you had a good time doing that stuff, because you did some really cool stuff.
oh yeah,
You were an innovator and the first person with multiple things, not just on the CoCo in certain cases, but in, you know, home computing in general. Like, you know, some of the stuff you did with skiing and stuff had never been done before. So thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for the interview. Thanks for donating all that stuff to Brian. We'll be showing some of it at the fest here. And thanks for having us in your home.
oh, you're quite welcome. I enjoyed it.
Okay.
Yes, and thank you from me too, from behind the camera.
Yes, sir. Have fun editing.
I think that's a wrap.
There we go. That is the conclusion to just an incredibly interesting day spent with Robert Kilgus, talking to him, learning about everything that he has done, learning about the games that I played as a kid, how they came into existence. This was an enlightening project for me. It was so much fun. So I would like to thank Curtis. I'd like to especially thank Robert. And yeah, that is it. If you haven't watched all the parts, I would recommend going back and watching them all, because they're just fascinating. Alright, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget that a like, a subscribe, and a comment below are all things that help out my channel a lot, and I truly, greatly appreciate. Alright, well, until next time, see you later.